Welcome to Silent Screams. Tonight, we take you deep into the heart of Sydney, Australia, a city known for its beautiful harbors, stunning beaches, and modern skyline. But beneath all of this lies a darker, more sinister side. In the shadows of its streets, in the crumbling corners of its oldest buildings, there are stories of ghostly encounters that will make you think twice about the city you thought you knew. Let's dive into these real ghostly encounters, straight from the chilling stories shared by people on Reddit. These aren't just spooky urban legends, they're terrifying experiences, told by those who lived through them. And if you think you're ready to hear them, keep your lights on. Because once you've heard these, you'll wonder if the ghosts of Sydney are still walking among us, watching us, waiting. I remember the first time I felt it, the cold. I had just moved to Sydney, eager to start a new chapter of my life. The city was everything I imagined, fast-paced, full of life, and never dull. But there was something else about it, something I couldn't shake. At night, when I walked home through the quieter streets, the air felt different, thicker, colder. As if I were being watched. But I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the anxiety of being new to the city, of being in an unfamiliar place. That was until the night I saw her. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m. I had just finished my shift at a cafe in the city center and was heading back to my apartment. I had to pass through an old alleyway near Darling Harbor, a shortcut I had started taking every night. The alley was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. On either side, old brick walls towered over me, casting long shadows on the cobblestone floor. I was used to the sounds of the city, people talking, cars passing, the occasional seagull overhead, but tonight, it was eerily quiet. Almost too quiet. The only sound was my footsteps echoing off the walls, my breath fogging in the chill air. That's when I saw her. At the end of the alley, standing in the dim light from a flickering street lamp, was a woman. She was tall, with long black hair that cascaded over her shoulders like a dark waterfall. Her clothes were old-fashioned, almost like a Victorian dress, the kind you'd see in old photographs or films. She was standing perfectly still, facing away from me, her back turned. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what I was seeing. I tried to convince myself she was just a person, maybe someone who had wandered into the alley, taking a shortcut like me. But there was something wrong, something that made my heart beat faster. Her stillness. The way she didn't move, even as I grew closer. My pulse raced, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. As I walked a bit closer, I could feel the temperature dropping. It wasn't just the cold night air, it was like an unnatural chill, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you feel uncomfortable. Just as I was about to call out to her, asking if she needed help, she turned around. Her face, if you could call it that, was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into me. Her mouth was slightly open, but there was no sound, no breath. Just silence. And in that moment, I felt something I couldn't explain, pure, unrelenting fear. Before I could react, she simply vanished. Like smoke in the wind, she was gone. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what I had just seen. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but there was none. I was alone in the alley, but somehow, it didn't feel like I was. As I walked away, I could feel her eyes on me, watching from the darkness. But when I looked back, there was nothing. That was my first encounter with something I couldn't explain in Sydney. A week later, I thought maybe I had just imagined it. Maybe I was tired, or maybe I had simply let my imagination get the best of me. But that all changed one evening, when I was walking through the Rocks, the historic neighborhood near Circular Quay. This area, with its narrow cobblestone streets and old, colonial buildings, has a history steeped in mystery. They say it's one of the most haunted parts of Sydney, but I didn't believe it, at least not until that night. I was walking down one of the quieter streets, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of the harbor with it. The street lights were dim, casting long shadows across the ground. It was another late night, and I was tired from a long day of work, eager to head home. As I turned a corner, I saw an old building that caught my eye, a former pub, now abandoned, its windows dark and covered in grime. I don't know why, but I found myself drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. I walked closer, my footsteps slow, deliberate. There was something about the building that seemed to pull me in, as if it were calling to me. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the building, feeling an odd sense of unease. The wind howled around me, and the street was empty. I looked around, and that's when I saw it. In one of the windows, there was a face. A pale, gaunt face staring out at me from behind the grime. It looked distorted, as if the glass had warped the features. But what made my blood run cold was the way it moved, slowly, as if it were following my every movement. I stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure in the window didn't move, but I could feel it watching me. Its eyes never leaving mine. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone, rooted to the spot. For a long time, I just stood there, unable to move. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, suffocating. It was as if the building itself was alive, aware of my presence, hungry for something, anything. Finally, I broke free from the trance and turned to leave. But as I walked away, I could feel the temperature drop even further, the chill seeping through my jacket. I quickened my pace, not daring to look back. I couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes in that window were still on me, still following me, even as I disappeared into the night. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the figure in the window. It felt like something had been left unfinished, like I had stepped into a world I didn't fully understand. I started to do some research into the history of the rocks, and what I found made my blood run cold. The old building I had seen was once a popular pub during the early 1900s. But it had a dark history. A woman, a young barmaid, was said to have been murdered there under mysterious circumstances. Some claimed it was a lover's quarrel gone wrong, others said it was a robbery. But the most chilling part of the story was that her body was never found. She simply vanished, as if she had disappeared into thin air. And now, people who pass by say they still see her, her face appearing in the windows, watching, waiting. One night, I decided to return to the rocks. I didn't know why, but something was pulling me back. Maybe it was the unanswered questions, or maybe it was the haunting feeling that something, someone, was still there, waiting for me. I walked down the familiar cobblestone street, the air heavy with tension. As I passed the old pub again, I felt that same sense of dread creeping up my spine. This time, though, I wasn't alone. I had brought a friend with me, someone who had lived in Sydney for years and had heard the stories but never believed them. We stood together, looking at the building. There was no movement, no sound, just the wind rustling through the trees. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow. A figure moving behind the window, just like the first time. I turned to my friend, but she hadn't seen it. When I looked back, the shadow was gone. But as I walked away, I heard something I'll never forget. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, but clear enough for me to hear, "You shouldn't have come back." The night was thick with silence as I looked around, my heart racing in my chest. There was no one there, yet the voice seemed to come from everywhere. I wanted to run, but something kept me rooted to the spot. It was as if the very air around me was holding me there, keeping me trapped in that moment. I turned to my friend, but she was already walking away, as if she hadn't heard anything at all. And then, I felt it, an overwhelming presence, closing in around me. A cold, suffocating force that seemed to come from every direction.